Thank you very much. All very fascinating, all very real, not just something you see in the movies. So it's my pleasure to announce the next speaker from ESA, Europe's Gateway to Space, Shaping of Europe's Space Capability. Please, a round of applause for the Engineer of Advanced Manufacturing in the Materials and Processes Section, Tech MSP, Advenit Makaya. Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, as it was said, I'm coming from the European Space Agency, where we provide support to the European industry in order to bring things to space and provide access to Europe. Just a few words of introduction about who we are. We are about 50 years old, 22 member states all across Europe, 8 facilities, and about 6 billion euro budget per year. Our purpose is to provide and promote peaceful access to space for the European industry and the European space research and technology world, and to promote the development of space applications that benefit European citizens. We are one of the only space agencies across the world who are active in pretty much all fields of space development, from science to navigation to telecommunication, and including, of course, technology development. So why additive manufacturing for space technology development? Because space is a very challenging set of requirements for materials and parts which have to access space. They need to have a low mass because every kilogram that we bring up there costs. We have small production series. We only have a few satellites of a certain type in a lifetime, basically. And they need to be very reliable because we cannot go up and repair when something breaks in space. We also have a relatively limited set of manufacturing processes, and we cover a whole range of geometries from very tiny parts for electronic components to large structures for spacecraft. So all this set of requirements appear very challenging, but we think additive manufacturing technologies, because they have a very wide range of possible technologies, a very wide range of possible materials which we can process, are very appropriate for the challenges of space. A little bit of timeline about how additive manufacturing came up and developed within the agency. So we started looking into additive in 2007, about 15 years ago, and then we run small technology studies to assess the viability of additive manufacturing for the kind of things that we do. And in 2014, we had a big workshop, about 350 participants from many different companies, which set us on the map of additive manufacturing for space. And since then, we have been developing more high-profile technologies with direct applications for space technology. And we have issued now the second edition of our additive manufacturing roadmap, which sets the scene for how additive manufacturing can be implemented in the development of our space missions. And I will present a slide later on that, but we have a standard, or we have started a working group in order to establish a standard for additive manufacturing for space applications. Some examples of the technology studies that we run. The first one is the ISCAR bracket. It's a bracket which is modeled on the Ariane 5 ME launcher, and where we managed to achieve more than 30% mass saving compared to the traditional design by processing titanium 6-4 by additive manufacturing. Another study led by Ariane Group and EOS was about reducing the number of parts in an injection nozzle. So 248 parts reduced to just one. We could achieve, or those companies could demonstrate a lead time reduction by a factor of 3, so 1/3 of the time to manufacture the part, and for half the price. We have also looked into applications for antenna and radio frequency. So in this study with the Swiss company Swiss 212, we did stereolithography of a polymer in order to build a demonstrator for an antenna, where the copper coating provided the necessary functions for the antenna. So there again, it was very promising results for an innovative design. Another probably very impressive technology development is for the Athena mission, which we plan to fly in the mid-2020s, which consists of a very large X-ray telescope, and where the optical bench structure, where all the tiny mirrors for the telescope have to fit with very tight geometric tolerances. So the optical bench is about 3 meters wide and 30 centimeters high. And as I said, the tolerances are very, very tight. So we have an ongoing technology development with Fraunhofer Institute in Germany and Airbus to try to additively manufacture this optical bench by using one robot which would deposit the metal. In this case, it's powder metal. And one other robot which will perform the milling task at the same time as the metal is deposited. So these are some pictures of the parts as it is being built. So this is a demonstrator, but it shows the potential of additive manufacturing, even for very large space parts with very tight tolerances. Another example is through our additive manufacturing benchmarking center, which is in Coventry in the UK, where we look into the international berthing docking mechanism. It's a docking mechanism which will be used by the American shuttle, the Dream Chaser, in order to dock to the International Space Station. And this docking mechanism has a ring, and we are trying to see whether this ring could be produced by additive manufacturing, there again to save mass, cost, and the environmental impact in terms of energy needs, material wasted, and so on. So these are some examples of technology development that we are running, but we have more and more actual implementations of additive manufacturing into real space missions. These are some examples. MTG, the Earth Observation Satellite, Sentinel-4, the Vega launcher, the small European launcher, Biomass, Quantum, which is a new model of telecommunication satellite, JUICE, which is a science satellite which will study the moons of Jupiter, and Electra, which is another telecommunication satellite. So for all these projects, we are looking into additive manufacturing in terms of real implementation into flight hardware. Some examples for Quantum, which is a new platform model for telecommunication satellites. We have successfully built solar panel brackets, so the brackets which attach the solar panel to the structure of the satellite, and it successfully passed the manufacturing readiness review about 2 years ago. Another success story so far for the implementation of additive manufacturing into flight is the polymeric vent port for the Vega C launcher, which is a small European launcher, and there we looked into carbon fiber reinforced polymer built by additive manufacturing. But of course, additive manufacturing is not just a process, it's part of an end-to-end process chain, where we start from the design, the material supply chain, which is very important to control the material which feeds into the process, the processing itself, the post-processing, surface treatment, reworking, machining, and so on. And of course, the testing and qualification, which is an essential part of space technologies. You have to qualify so that the part fulfills its function for the design life of the mission. And these end-to-end steps translate into a philosophy for developing additive manufacturing parts. We have to define the design of the part with respect to the capabilities of additive manufacturing, so step a little bit out of the conventional way of designing parts. Of course, we have to test and evaluate the additive manufacturing products. We have to verify it, qualify it, and then when we are happy with the whole sequence of manufacturing and verification, we roll into actual production. So these are some examples of the studies that we do in order to tick the boxes for this end-to-end process chain. We are looking into a compilation of powder supply capability across Europe for powder bed additive manufacturing. So looking at the geometry, the irregularity of the powder grains, the flowability, and so on, and try to characterize the capabilities of different suppliers, and with the objective of establishing a standard for what powders need to fulfill in order to be good to use for additive manufacturing processes. We also look into fractography, how additively manufactured part breaks, how the fracture surface can tell us about what defects are acceptable, what inspection measures we need to implement for additively manufactured part, and so on. And we are also working with Politecnico di Milano in Italy on damage tolerance methodology for assessing the capability and the performance of additive manufactured part, and also probabilistic fatigue life assessment model for ILM parts. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, we have just kicked off a working group in March for ESA, a space standard on additive manufacturing. So there are various companies involved in this working group. And for the moment, we focus on powder bed processes, which will be the first standard, with the objective of extending to further technologies. So far I've talked about additive manufacturing as a way to build parts which will fly in terms of reliability and so on. But additive manufacturing can also be thought of in a very different way for space missions, about how we can actually apply it in orbit. So the objective of this is to completely change the mission logistics. If we have a long-term exploration mission, for example, going to Mars will take about 6 months, we need to be able to repair, to maintain the equipment without waiting for a resupply mission to the spacecraft. So additive manufacturing can actually help us to manufacture spare parts, to repair when something breaks during the flight or on an orbital base, and so on. So to that purpose, we initiated in 2015 a study with the Italian Space Agency, Altran, Thales Alenia Space, and the IIT about a small demonstrator for a 3D printer which operated on the International Space Station during Samantha Cristoforetti's flight on the ISS, and which demonstrated fused deposition modeling in orbit. So it was PLA. It's not a very strong engineering material, but we actually demonstrated that it works. And the next step is to use materials which actually make sense for engineering purposes. And this is another study which we completed earlier this year, which consisted of developing a printer to print PEEK, which is another type of polymers, much more relevant in terms of space operation because it meets the outgassing requirements for operating in vacuum, for example. And it also has much better mechanical properties for engineering applications. So we developed a 3D printer which doesn't depend on the gravity vector. You can tilt it, you can put it on the side, it will still print. So it demonstrates that it can actually work in microgravity. And we built some examples of parts which could illustrate the case where something breaks and we have to change it, a spanner, a tool, a screw, during an orbital mission. And the next step after printing plastics is actually to print metals in orbit. And we have a project with Airbus, which consists just of that, developing a metal 3D printer for the International Space Station. And we are working towards a flight in 2020 for this demonstrator. And the next step, once we arrive at the destination after an orbital flight, what do we do if we establish a base on a planet, on the moon, on Mars, in terms of building, operating, and maintaining the base? And there again, additive manufacturing can help us. Say we establish a lunar base or a base on Mars, we cannot just wait for supplies to come in with the next shipment. We have to be able to make use of all the materials we have on site. The first one being the regolith, the dust that you find on the surface of the planet. And other types of materials are the ones that we bring with us. For example, if you bring a module, you can transform it into a habitat. So that's additive manufacturing on planet. So we have looked into ways of using the regolith, the dust which is on the surface of the Moon or Mars, in order to make habitats. So there we mixed the dust with a magnesium oxide and magnesium chloride binder, which transformed it into a solid material, and we made a demonstrator, 1.5 ton demonstrator for a building block for a shell for a habitat, which would protect the crew from radiation, temperature changes, and so on. In another study, we decided to look into getting rid of the binder, because the binder that you use to consolidate the dust has to be shipped from Earth. So how can we actually just use the concentrated solar light, the light that the sunlight which is available in infinite quantities on the surface of the Moon, to fuse the grains of the dust together? And we did that with the German space agency, the ESA, where we developed a simple 3-axis table, a set of mirrors which concentrate the light, and we could 3D print 3-dimensional objects just with lunar dust simulant and concentrated sunlight. In this other study, we looked at the process map that you see on the left is a combination of all the various ways we can combine the dust which is available on the planet with binders, with energy sources, in order to make material which can be used for hardware and habitat construction. And the example was a process which we tried, which consisted of mixing the dust with phosphoric acid in order to make a paste which we could deposit layer by layer and make 3-dimensional structures. And the study which I'm running now, which will finish at the end of the year, looks at how 3D printing can help us in all possible ways to build, operate, and maintain a lunar base. So from everything from the structure itself, to the tools that the astronauts would need, to the food, the living tissues, if we have to think about providing medical care on planet. So we gathered a consortium of 4 companies, which invited different additive manufacturing actors, which showcased their technologies, printing regolith, polymers, food, living tissues, and metals, for example. So with this, I would move to the next step, which is going beyond additive manufacturing itself, because additive manufacturing is just a part of a larger picture, which is advanced manufacturing. Advanced manufacturing is all the processes which provide a step change in terms of performance, in terms of reduction of cost, reduction of lead time, and that's something that we are looking into in a broader sense. Processes like solid-state joining, laser shot peening, novel surface treatments, and so on. We are trying to identify them and provide support for technology development for these various technologies. So on this, I will end up by acknowledging my colleagues who have contributed to this presentation and thanking you for your attention. Yeah.